All right. Thank you so much. So my name is Sean. And just a quick background about myself and this project. I graduated with my undergraduate degree in history in 2013 from UC Davis. And at that time, I was also volunteering at the Sacramento Animal Control and Rescue Shelter as a volunteer, and I did that for about 2 years. After I graduated, I moved back down to Southern California, where I was employed by the Humane Society of Ventura County, where I worked there for 2 years as a kennel manager. After that, I always felt like I had left some loose ends as far as what I wanted to accomplish with my education. So I moved. Well, I had already been back in the area, so I started looking at graduate programs, and I enrolled in the California State Northridge History Department's graduate program in fall of 2019. And so my goal was I wanted to combine my love of history with my passion of animal welfare and animal control and create something that I could put out there that could educate people not only about the importance of animal control, like something like and something that didn't come out of a vacuum that I feel like our society kind of takes for granted, but also a lot of municipal agency that again I feel like people kind of just assume has always been there, and they weren't born out of any real necessity, and they weren't really the product of this relationship between the people and the government and private power and the public power kind of uniting to make reforms happen, and this idea of a progressive vision for like a better future. I enrolled in fall of 2019, and immediately I sought out to accomplish this goal, whether my class was the environmental history of the Middle East or Civil War. All of my research and all of my papers were about animal control and how it existed in that time. And this established a familiarity with the subject, as well as a familiarity with historiography. But the real impetus for this project came during my time with my internship at the Museum of Ventura County's research library, when the Ventura County Animal Services put in a research inquiry for the history of animal control in Ventura County prior to the establishing of the municipal shelter there, which I think is sometime in like the 1950s. I think it's 1956, if my memory serves me correctly. So this was spring of 2019, and this really coalesced my vision into like something that I could direct. Like, okay, I'm going to do this local regional history emphasis on the history of animal control. I'm going to do the history of animal control in Ventura County, and my research was going very well. I was working with librarians. I was utilizing my internship. I was going to county archives at the county clerk and register, and I was in contact with a lot of people who were really excited for this program. But then the pandemic struck, and all my in-person leads just shut down. And it just kind of fizzled out. And that semester it just ended. Like my project kind of just ended at that point. I submitted what I had, but I always wanted to continue. And I had that opportunity the following semester when I enrolled in a research seminar. But again, the pandemic was still raging. This is fall of 2020. So I couldn't do in-person research. And under the guidance of my professors and with the help of my department's amazing librarian, I was able to pivot to Los Angeles due to the abundance of digitized resources, which included newspapers, directories, as well as just contextual periodicals. Being locked up and sheltering in place really just gave me this opportunity to pore over all of these all these resources, and uncover this fascinating story about the rise of animal control at the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century, and how it kind of represents the emergence of these progressive values in this microcosm of local and regional history. So, and that's the version of this project that I submitted to the Los Angeles City Historical Society for the Scholarship Award. But I had always intended to use this project as my like culminating graduate project, which involved extensive peer review with people in my program. I know Arnoldo has read my paper in that culminating experience, as well as like other incarnations in the back, in my, because I was in the program with Arnaldo. So Arnaldo's heard this many times. Apologies if you're tired of it by now. But anyway, so extensive peer review with people in my department, working with my the professor who was running the program. I ended up omitting a lot of the general U.S. history components and including more newspapers. My original version of the paper that I wrote for the research seminar only really had the Los Angeles Times, but this new expanded version, which was kind of like my graduating thesis, so to speak, had the Herald in it, the Evening Examiner, and just a lot more directories and just a lot more secondary, like expansive footnotes, better division, organization and subsections. And it really turned out to be something that I thought was really special, and I was really proud of it. And it helped me graduate in spring of 2021 with my master's degree. And it was around that time that I found out I'd won the scholarship from the Los Angeles City Historical Society, which then gave me the opportunity to do what I had always envisioned. So flash back to that original research seminar paper that I wrote, again, the one that I submitted for the scholarship award. The professor who ran that class gave it to the editor of the Southern California Quarterly because he believed that it would be a good fit for the publication. So I'd already been kind of in contact with the editor who was very supportive of the idea and said, you know, after I was done with the culminating experience, to get in touch with her and, you know, begin the process of fine tuning it for publication in a peer-reviewed academic journal. So with the scholarship, I was able to take time off of work because I was working full-time through school, more or less. You know, sometimes I had to take a little time off. But anyway, this allowed me to take a lot more time off than I normally would during the summer months and really fine-tune it to do that peer review process. And it resulted in it being published in this most recent winter edition of the journal. So that was kind of like the conclusion and how I had always envisioned this project ending. And with that, I went on to get the job that I have right now as an animal control officer for Ventura County Animal Services. So it's pretty funny how this all kind of worked out. I kind of put the project out there, and I'm hoping that it serves this purpose. It educates people, it spreads awareness, and it kind of sheds light on this interesting story. And now I'm kind of like living the continuation of it. So it's cool how it all worked out. So with that introduction done, and kind of without further ado, so to speak, I will kind of just give a overall overview of the project itself. So appearing in 1909, this article from the Los Angeles Herald, it kind of shows what the larger project is about. So Los Angeles had just replaced its traditional pound system with a more humane one overseen by a private animal welfare organization that had been invested with official powers by the municipal government. The article describes how this new method would be better than the old-fashioned way of hunting strays and unlicensed dogs with a wagon and a net, congratulating what it saw as the removal of primitive methods that it associated with corruption. It describes how animal control reform was only one of the numerous evidences of the progress which had attended the growth of Los Angeles, a city it described as having clean metropolitan instincts as well as clean metropolitan aspirations. But what the article, in my opinion, really does is it highlights three important layers to my story. The first being the transition from the traditional pound system to a system of municipal animal control. The second is a shift from viewing the pound system's failures as isolated instances of brutality to being associated with problems like that were connected to larger social issues. And finally, it demonstrates how municipal government became guided by ideas of progress and modernity, kind of with this idea of creating a new, modern, humane world. So with that said, what exactly were these primitive methods that precipitated this evolution in the city's expectations for animal control? So in the mid 1880s is when you start to see the city's newspapers begin to run stories about the animal shelters, or at this time they're called pounds, but the overall brutality of this traditional pound system. But they refer to it more as lamentable but isolated instances of brutality. dogs were described as like the dogs that were licensed and or more or less adoptable were quick to leave the shelter, but unlicensed dogs were ruthlessly killed, with the city paying the pound masters anywhere between 50 cents to $1 per scalp. The main and these stories kind of ramp up in the way they describe this brutality too, but you definitely get a sense of like, well, this is kind of bad, but we're doing this to solve this problem of rabies, which was a very misunderstood disease at the time that was just loosely associated with dog bites during the warmer months of summer. Hence the expression the dog days of summer. But in 1886, Henry Bergh founds the nation's first animal welfare organization, and kind of the precursor to modern animal control. And that's the American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, which is the SPCA. And so that's 1886. And you can imagine like the growth of Los Angeles kind of coinciding at that time. A lot of these animal welfare reformers begin moving westward, and indeed a lot of the people that were kind of running and were the seeds that were planted that were monumental in facilitating this shift that I'll be talking about next, were kind of transplants from that East Coast style, and that's what they were looking to project onto Los Angeles, which to them was this growing new city. And so as that's happening, the newspapers begin to really pick the spirit up and start to really be highly critical of the traditional pound system. And nothing personifies this more than the pound master who was named George Vacher, who became pound master in 1886. So Vacher staffed the pound with his family, mostly his sons, and together the newspapers described them as being involved in all kinds of like corruption and scandalous deeds, including going after licensed dogs explicitly in order to exploit money from them, as well as buying dead animals so that they can say to the get more money from the city for those, like, again, those bounties on dead dogs and dead animals, and the idea of preventing rabies. So the Vacher family becomes like personified of these primitive methods that the city wanted to look at and saw something that was in the past that they wanted to move away from, the antithesis to this modern humane world. And so with this, you really see the city's newspapers begin to point as animal control as being or lack thereof, sorry, as being something that was connected to larger social issues. And we get this shift in public's perception from viewing the pound system's brutality as unfortunate but somewhat isolated artifacts of the traditional system to something that was linked to larger social issues. These social issues were multifaceted, including race, class, culture, gender, in many ways how urban Americans, not only like Los Angelinos, but urban Americans were defining themselves at the turn of the century. And so this change precipitated public cries for reform, which were expressed in newspapers, as well as the criticisms of the traditional system. And this manifested itself in petitions, this interplay between the public and the newspapers to get these petitions passed that called on the city officials to change for reform. And one such petition that was put out in 1908 was largely championed by the Herald, which took on the cause in what it called active warfare. And this petition largely was a laundry list of the accusations against the disgraced pound keeper and his family. So the city created a committee to hear both sides of it. And after forming the committee, and after the committee did that, they agreed that what they needed to do was adopt what was being called the Pasadena system. So Pasadena, 3 years prior, abolished its traditional pound system after a series of similar corruption scandals and replaced it with one that sought to punish the irresponsible dog owner over the stray dog. And they did this by, if your dog was licensed, they would return it home to you free of charge. if they encountered a unlicensed stray, instead of taking that dog to the pound and killing it for 50 cents or $1 from the city or whatever, they would investigate that stray dog until their owners were found. At which point the owners were then given the chance to pay a fee or issued a warrant for their arrest. So Pasadena had placed that responsibility to manage that new system in the control of their branch of the SPCA. And during this time is when you start seeing humane societies and SPCAs and other private animal welfare organizations start popping up in the city. Now, Los Angeles, hoping to adopt a similar system, chose not to place it under the oversight of their own SPCA, but rather under the oversight of an entirely new organization that had auspiciously formed only 2 years prior, which was called the Humane Animal League, which was led by its president and poundmaster, Dr. W.A. Lamb, who also served as a city official on the Playground Commission. So, initially, the newspapers were really supportive of the league and lauded their ambitions to end the profiting from the animal control process. But the league hit roadblocks almost right away when they started to struggle with the city for funding, which came to the league in the form of shares of the revenue from the licenses, but were only allocated at certain intervals during the year. The league's biggest problems came when infighting separated the league into two divisions. And this happened when Dr. W.A. Lamb stepped down from his position, who had grown frustrated serving as both the poundmaster and the president, and separated the position into two, and gave that position to two different people. The league president was given to Helen Mathewson, and the role of poundmaster was given to George Lawson. And so this created a division on who had final say in the day-to-day operations of the pound. As league president, Mathewson believed that the right was hers, and as poundmaster, Lawson believed that the right was his. This came to a boiling point one afternoon when a deputy was sent to investigate a goat that was claimed to be neglected by its owner. Now, as the deputy was coming back from confiscating that goat, he sold the goat to an independent party and pocketed the profit. Lawson was furious because he interpreted that as essentially theft from the league's the pound's already the depleted coffers. They were hurting for money and they needed everything they could get. Now that deputy went to his landlord, who was also on the league's board of supervisors and was an ardent supporter of Mathewson. So Mathewson responded by reinstating the deputy, which Lawson interpreted as being a direct challenge to his authority. The insulting kerfuffle resulted in Lawson being asked to leave. He refused, and so the league then went to the mayor, who has growing really frustrated with a situation that was supposed to be an improvement from the drama-filled era of Vacher and his family, but was something that was becoming just as bad. Newspapers began to lament the lack of reforms and improvements that the league had promised, and even more so were actually rather disgusted by the continued employment of the Vacher family through the league. They remained staffing the pound. There was really just a change of management, with Lawson being the poundmaster instead of Vacher, but essentially it was the same group of people running the day-to-day operations of the pound. So at this time, the mayor is kind of frustrated, and he agrees to kind of crowbar Lawson out of his position as poundmaster. Lawson then files a lawsuit against the Humane Animal League for money that he claimed he was owed as his time as poundmaster. The league argued that poundmaster previous Lamb had taken the position knowing that he would be not getting paid for it. But Lawson argued that the poundmaster relied on an earlier contract with the city that explicitly said that they were to get paid. Again, relying on the traditional pound system that Vacher and previous poundmasters used to make money. He cited that as should be the source of the poundmaster's income. So there's this discrepancy, and this put a spotlight on the Humane Animal League's shortcomings and gave the opportunities for rival private animal welfare organizations like the SPCA to really call into question the nature of the contract that the league had with the city, explicitly pointing to the fact that Dr. Lamb had served as a member, as a city official, as at the time the league entered into contract with the city. At the same time, he was also the president and poundmaster. And they've looked at that and said that was a violation of the city's charter. So with all of this drama that was circulating and all these the dirty laundry being aired, and the rivals coming out of the woodwork to kind of really take this contract, do everything they can to take this contract away from the league, an injunction ended up being filed. A group of private concerned citizens, but from what I gathered, they were essentially under the auspices of the SPCA, right? It was basically there was like connections to the rival animal welfare organizations, and they filed this injunction that stops the city from being able to provide funds for the pound. And at that point, city officials kind of call it this experiment a day, and they come to terms with the league over the contract and release them, with the expectation that the city would provide all of the funds for all of the employees who, for many months, this whole time this injunction was going on, were not being paid. So sure enough, the city in 1909 and takes over the role. Sorry, they take over the role of municipal animal control on its own and create an entirely new commission that was to be overseen by city officials, and that was called the Humane Animal Commission. So this is a picture of the goat. This is from the Herald, I believe. A funny. You can just get a sense that the newspapers were really having a field day with all of this drama when this was all coming apart. In conclusion, once the Humane Animal Commission was formed and the city began to have direct oversight over the nature of animal control, it became embroiled in a larger political struggle as the progressive vision for a humane future began to encroach upon traditional power structures. This is really embodied by the fact that at the same time all of this is happening and the city's reforming its animal control, it was also in the process of recalling its mayor, whose administration had been accused of widespread corruption by many of the city's newspapers. And so when this happened, the Humane Animal Commission, when they ended the league's contract and assumed the responsibility for itself, newspapers like the Times soured on the idea of animal control because they then viewed it as being connected to this recall administration that they were politically against. Conversely, the Los Angeles Herald, which had played just as much of a role in ousting the previous mayor as they did in reforming, spreading the awareness for the reforming of the city's animal control, published significantly fewer stories once it became linked to a political administration that it supported. But the reason why I utilize this time period is because it shows that at the very beginning of the 19th century, or sorry, at the very beginning of the 20th century, Los Angeles was really united in this idea that through the extension of municipal government and through things like reform and pragmatic extensions of government power at the lower, local level, that they could fight social injustice and corruption in order to create a more humane world. So that was the overview of the project, and I just wanted to say thanks for the opportunity to revisit this subject because it was really something that meant a lot to me, and it was years in the work. It was to do, and I'm happy to have the opportunity to have that scholarship, publish it, and kind of conclude that, and now focus on my own future as an animal control officer. In many ways, I try to aspire to maintain maybe some kind of vestige of that idea of creating a more humane world through animal control. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you, Sean. I could really feel your passion for the subject. I didn't realize your history as kennel keeper, was it? And now is an animal control officer. Are you an animal control officer up in Ventura or with
Yes,
LA?
for Ventura County Animal Services.
Okay, very good. All right, well, how about if we take a few questions?
Sure.
Did you reach out to the City of Los Angeles City Archives very much?
No, I didn't utilize anything from them, but I did utilize their digitized directories quite a bit to establish a timeline of pound masters, as well as other finer details that appear in the journal article for the Southern California Quarterly. I didn't utilize any of those. I really wanted to focus on the interplay of the idea of this project was really to show how newspapers played a pivotal role in facilitating this interaction between this change in expectations from the public and how that manifested in change of municipal power. So was my primary motivation for focusing almost solely on press.
Yeah, I work for the city clerk's office. I recall a retiring veterinarian with the city of Los Angeles who was working on writing a history of the department, focused on the shelters and the medical services that they provided to animals. I suspect he turned in a copy of that to the archives, but I don't know what became of that.
I would love to check it out. There is a lot more history to be told on this subject on both sides of this period of time that I cover. What I cover is just this really brief blip, but there's a lot of details in it. And in those details, again, you kind of see the emergence and how a lot of these like progressive ideas manifested themselves in these like local levels to make actual changes. That being said, there's so much more to this story that I hope that I left those, like if you were to read my journal article, I hope that I give directions and point to them, because there's so much gender and there's so much race and there's so much other stories to be told that weren't the stories that I wanted to be telling, so to speak, because I felt like I had a pretty solid idea of what I wanted to do, and I could go in so many different directions. I really think that people could write books about this kind of stuff, but I know if you were to extend outward from where I end the story, you see the political partisanship, and that manifests itself more in the press. You get a lot more people questioning the league or the commission, the city officials, as they try to flesh out. Like when I end the story, they really don't have a good idea of what they're doing. They just know that they want to be the ones doing it. And as you get into the early 20th century, from my research, you get questions, you get calls against like vivisection, and it's interesting the kind of problems that come up in the 20th century, and what once like you get these like idea of what a humane animal shelter is in the beginning of the 20th century, you know, in our world right now would be extremely inhumane. Animal shelters just like 10 years ago, if you look at the statistics, were in our eyes now extremely inhumane, with the number of animals euthanized for space, which is something that unfortunately is continuing on. But in a lot of the larger cities, they've managed to get those numbers really, really low. But again, it's the idea of what is humane and what is not humane is something that kind of changes as society changes. And I think that if you look at that and analyze that, it speaks a lot to the values of a society and how those values manifest themselves in actual change.
Now the comments are pouring in here. Have one from former board member Helene. Very interesting subject. It would be interesting to develop with other animals, horses, sheep, etc., roaming in Los Angeles.
Yeah, that was something that kind of I talk about a lot in the version of the paper that I submitted to to you guys for the scholarship, that I ended up taking out because my period of time focuses on, and I do give service to this briefly in the introduction, but there's a change of emphasis on what the roles animals played in cities. And so at the end of the 19th century, with industrialization, you get the shift of emphasis away from viewing animals as being sources of power, animal power, you know, horses being used to pull dredges, streetcars, stuff like that. and you get the emergence of animals. That goes away kind of slowly, but it does. And it goes more into the country, and it goes into places that people aren't looking. What replaces that is this new developing idea of animals as this affectionate member of the family. And this is something that really begins associated with American values, almost so much, which explains why when America went to Cuba at this time, one of the, like, you have members from private animal welfare organizations going to Cuba with these almost colonial attempts to be like, well, we have to tame these like savage people who are so inhumane to their animals because they're participating in cockfights, they treat their work animals horribly. They associate animal welfare with this kind of Anglo-American identity that was really forming at the beginning of the 20th century. And again, you can look into that in depth, and come up to a lot of really interesting arguments and find a lot of really interesting sources. And that wasn't the story that I wanted to be told. I hope that I provided like enough, like especially in the footnotes, for the published article, if you wanted to find those information, it's out there, and it's a really interesting story. But again, to just go back, it's this connection to this affectionate role that animals were taking at the end of the 19th century, and how that became linked to how modern, urban, in many cases Anglo, I hate to say it, but that's kind of how it was, because again, it's not the story that I want to tell, but it's there. How these people in the city viewed themselves, and what they needed to change in order to create this progressive vision of kind of like a utopia, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Edward Call asks, were there any city and state leaders that demonstrated interest in this area of human-animal control? And comments, nice presentation, thank you.
Yeah, so there are quite a bit of names that you come across. So all of these people like Helen Mathewson and George Lawson, and Dr. W.A. Lamb in particular, they were all what I would consider to be prominent people in their in the society at the time. Again, Dr. Lamb being a city official, but unfortunately, it's been a while since I've visited this this project, so the names are all kind of escaping me, and these are all things that I cover in the published journal article. But essentially, the group, I'm going to try to explain this the best I can because I can't remember the name of the organization. It's ran by the wife of some guy who was a really important city official. It's all killing me because it was something that I put in the footnotes, but I don't really expand on. But again, that concerned citizens group that files the injunction against the city so that it cannot pay the Humane Animal League. Well, that group of concerned citizens were all affluent, high-ranking members of society who were being represented by the lawyer, who was the same lawyer as the SPCA, as well as the same lawyer for Lawson. So there are a lot of people in like the high society members who are participating in this, and also it is something that city officials, whether they like to or not, were forced to reckon with it due to the amount that the press was engaging with the public and feeding into the public and helping, like, putting advertisements for permission. I mean, heck, the Herald called, hey, we are taking up active warfare against the traditional pound system, which is a relic of this barbaric vestige of this society that we don't want to associate with. That's old urban America. Los Angeles, at the beginning of the 20th century, with this huge growth, we are unprecedented growth. We are we are the future. And indeed, you read articles about the recall election written in other states, the mayoral recall election, and other reform things that were going on in Los Angeles at this time. And a lot of the nation's eyes were on this like burgeoning young city. So it was very much in the interest of the officials and people in high society to engage in animal control reform. The names just escape me, and for that I apologize.
That's okay. Adam, current board member, comments, he found the info tidbit about the phrase dog days of summer very interesting. Thank you. Thanks you for that. And he asks, what is your favorite pet-related pun?
Oh, well, I mean, so when I mean, all of the sections in my journal article and for the culminating project as well. So pretty much all of the incarnations of the project after the what I submitted for the scholarship, all the sections have puns. And again, the title of the paper is A Municipal Tale, right? So there's a lot of puns in this paper, which is something I'm proud of. But my favorite one is in the terms of this story is refusing to let sleeping dogs lie, because animal control is something that I feel it was something that was spawned out of a necessity. Whether that necessity was rabies control, which eventually they ended up not, I mean, rabies is important, but let's be honest, it wasn't as sensational as like the shift from inhumane treatment of animals to the humane treatment of animals. And so, just as I was speaking earlier, that window shifts and that struggle continues to this day. Improvements continue. People are out there trying to find homes for animals, do everything they can so that animals don't have to be euthanized in shelters, reaching out to rescues, to fosters. And so, yeah, in my mind, it's, we're refusing to let sleeping dogs lie, but that's kind of messed up because you should let a sleeping dog lie because they're relaxing. So I don't know.
All right, thank you. And Helene adds, I also wish I could learn more on the emotional relationship of men and dogs during the same time period.
Yeah, that if there is anything that's out there for like books that have been published on the subject, it would be on that subject as well. That is the biggest, most like the historiography for the history of like animal welfare in the United States is really inundated with people looking at the shifts of from animals being like the source of power, as I was mentioning before, like a utilitarian purpose of animals, to an affectionate role that they take in the household. And a lot of that has to do with this and that stuff. If you're interested in that, definitely look at the version of the paper that I submitted for the scholarship, because I really enjoyed that part. I really did a lot to put that kind of that aspect of American history, and the sources that I use are kind of like an overview of that historiography. But it really goes back to, I mean, you can go all the way, and I do in this version of the paper that is available at the LA City Historical Society's webpage. But if you go all the way back to like colonial times, there is artifacts of this this sentiment, right? But it really happens after the Second Great Awakening, really, and like things like abolition. And so after the Civil War, abolition in these people's minds is ended. It's like, okay, the slaves are free. So what else can we do to increase this teleological path to like this utopia, greater society? Well, let's look at other like marginalized and like repressed groups of people and see if we can like reform and free them as well. And so animals, children, and a lot of and other things and such. That's why the SPCA, the ASPCA, was also the nation's first child protection service, because no one else was doing it. There was no government institution to do that. So there's a lot of stuff published on that, and a lot of it is what kind of inspired me to take this subject in the direction I did.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Sean. And with that, we'll let sleeping dogs lie, and we'll move on to the next presentation.